Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for joining. So my name is Olivia, Olivia Ambrose. I am an HR manager. I work for a big construction company that employs about 100 people and about another 150 contractors. We'll talk about those in a minute. Um, so yeah, it was actually my daughter used to volunteer for the Launchpad Collective, and she works for a refugee charity in London. And she asked me to do this talk, so I said, yeah, sure. So what we're going to cover in these slides is just about the basics about working in the UK and what your employment rights are and what your employer should do for you. So we're going to talk about the difference between being employed and working as a contractor.
Okay.
We're going to talk about what your employer must do for you before and on your first day of employment, the different types of contracts of employment, a probation period, and less than 2 years service and what that means in more than 2 years service and what that means in UK employment law. And then we're going to touch a little bit about equal opportunities and discrimination, and then move on to questions. So the first slide is about just trying to define where you think you are, or if you're offered a job, kind of what that means. So working as a contractor, now quite often that can be somebody that's doing well, it can be any kind of job actually. So you work for a company, you might work for a building company, or you might work as a care assistant or something like that, but it means that you are technically self-employed. So you'll get paid in full for the hours you've worked. They won't take any tax or national insurance from you. You have a responsibility to do that yourself to HMRC. You will probably have to give them obviously your copy of your passport and proof of right to work, which they should do those checks to make sure that they're employing people who do have the right to work in the UK. But they don't have any obligation to pay you any holidays or pay you on sick pay or offer to or continue to offer you work. If there's work there, they'll offer it, you do it, you get paid in full. So working as an employee is very different, because that means that you've got a contract between the employer and you, and that would mean a contract of employment. So usually as well, it was a good idea for anybody starting a new job to ask for an offer letter. So, so you're talking to the new employer, and then you ask them to put in writing, they say, this is the job they're giving you and this is the pay, holidays, etc., etc. And then really on the first day when you start work, they should give you your full contract. You will have a paid holiday allowance in the UK. That holiday allowance is a minimum of 28 days. Now that's 20 days flexible leave you can take whenever you want, and 8 days of the statutory bank holidays, which is kind of Easter, Christmas, the bank holidays in the summer. The company are responsible for taking your tax and your national insurance and your pension contributions as well, and giving them to the government and recording them under your national insurance number. And you will get, at the minimum, you will get statutory sick pay when you're sick. But currently the law is that you have to be you only start getting statutory sick pay on day 4. So the first 3 days is no pay, although the law is changing on that next year. So day 1, this is talking about employment now, not contractor. This is just employment. So what your employer must do on or before your first day. So as I said before about an offer of employment, so a letter or an email just saying exactly what they're going to offer you. And then that offer must include a start date. Now, sometimes we'll come on to contracts in a minute, but I've put here end date, and that because it may be that you get offered a short-term contract, maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months, maybe 1 year. so that there may be an end date on that contract. It must say what you're going to get paid, the gross pay, not the net pay, the gross, which is the total amount, and your weekly hours of work. Now, this could be part-time or it could be full-time. Your overtime rates, if that's relevant to the job, because quite a lot, particularly with trades or builders or electricians or that kind of work, then quite often you will have a contract maybe that's 40 hours, and then plus there's an additional rate for overtime or sometimes more money to work at weekends. But it's important for you that you make sure it's written down very clearly. So, and then holiday allowance for the year, as I just mentioned, is 28 days. Now, some companies expect people to work on a bank holiday. That's fine, but if you work the bank holiday, then you get another day off at another time, which means you still get the full 28 days. Okay. So, what your employer will ask from you when they first start you working for their company is usually you have to fill out a new starter form with all your basic details on. They might as well ask for a family member, because in case you have an accident or like an emergency contact, they will ask you to complete a form from HMRC, which is the government tax office, that you fill out. And then they will ask to see your passport, or they will ask you for your share code. And that's important from the employer because they have to prove that they've checked everybody's right to work. And then they also might ask you to complete a medical questionnaire. But it's important that that there's a reason for this, and it's not. They have to ask you for that medical questionnaire after they've made the offer of employment. They can't do it before. So they can't ask you for the medical questionnaire before they offer you the job, because maybe on that form it might say that you've had medication for back problem, and then they're going to turn around and say, no, we're not going to employ you. They can't do that, it's illegal. But the reason they ask for it afterwards is to make sure that they know if you have a health problem that they need to be aware of. So it's important to make sure that they don't ask you before you get offered the job. So this slide is about different types of contract. It can be a bit confusing. So the normal basic type contract is the one that people imagine to be a contract, is a permanent contract. So you start working for your employer and then you're there however long you wish to be there, or they want, given that there's no problems, you could be there for 20 years. So it's no end date, can be full-time or can be part-time with agreed hours. So that's one type of contract. Another one, as I mentioned before, fixed term. So it could be 3 months, could be 6 months, 1 year. Now that might be because they just want to finish a body of work. But then what they can do with that is if they give you a fixed term contract, they can, let's say you start with 6 months, then there's no reason why they can't extend that if they want to keep you, working with them. But it can't be extended over 3 years. After then, it's really termed as being a permanent contract. So the next one on the list there is 0 hours. So the 0 hours contracts have a bad reputation, and the law is changing around 0 hours contract probably next year. But essentially, it means that it's a contract that doesn't have an end date. I think somebody's joined but haven't muted. Yeah, so a 0 hours contract basically means that it's a contract with no end date, like a permanent contract, but it doesn't give you a set amount of hours. These are very unpopular, certainly with the government, because it could mean that 1 week they'll give you 5 hours, next week 10 hours, next week 5, and there's no. It's difficult for employees to have a 0 hours contract because it means that they can't guarantee how much money they're going to earn, which is very difficult, obviously, for employee situation. But with these, then, if when they offer you hours, you can choose to accept, but also you can choose to say no because you might have another job, you've made other plans. So it works both ways. They offer you work, you say yes, I'll work, or they offer you work and you say no, I can't because I'm working elsewhere. So it kind of works both ways. Whereas with the other contracts, you are an obligation to do the hours that you've agreed to do with them under the terms of the contract. So the next one is an apprenticeship contract. Obviously, apprenticeships are something that the government is really trying to encourage. And I think for young people, coming through school and then going into some sort of apprenticeship with college and then working with an employer, be that an office or on a building site, it doesn't matter. It's a very good way of young people to, well, and older people actually, to get experience in the working world. So that type of contract will have an end date, and it will be when the apprenticeship finishes for the college, when they finish their exams. So, and then after that finishes and that young person has finished doing their course, so it's a, bricklaying course, finished doing their bricklaying course, then the employer then can make them an offer of permanent employment and they will give them a new version of contract. So the thing with an apprenticeship contract, unless that young person is really, really badly behaved, as in doesn't go to college, is rude, or is just a bad employee, it's actually very difficult to dismiss somebody when they're on an apprenticeship contract, because when you dismiss them, you're also taking away their opportunity to learn and develop. So the next one is no contract. So sometimes some employees will say, oh yeah, come and work for me, I'll pay you whatever, and they never give you a contract, in a paper contract. So I think the important thing here is to remember that you may not have a paper contract, but it is still there is still a contract of employment between you and your employer, even if it's not written down on paper, because you are giving your services, your time to them. They are paying you for that time. They are also obviously entitled, they have to give you holidays and pay your tax and national insurance and so on. So that is still a contract, even though it's not written on paper. But they should they should give you a paper version. Okay. And then just last point there, if you're unsure, you need to understand if you're an employee or a contractor, kind of going back to the last slide one of the last slides we did. So you've started your new job, then hopefully you've got a contract, you've got an offer letter, you've done all the new starter paperwork, they've given you some training, and off you go. So it is usual for a company to go a probation period. It usually starts at sometimes 3 months, sometimes 6 months. And it's time for your employer to be sure that they've employed the right person, you're right for the role, for the job. And it's an opportunity as well in that 6 months that they can help and train you and give you more support to help you to do that job. If they're worried about your performance, then they should have a conversation with you, try and give you more training and so on. But the reality is that in that probationary period, they can dismiss you with a week's notice for really any reason. It could be because the company hasn't got so much work. It could be because they don't think you can do the job very well. It can be for lots of different reasons, but essentially they can dismiss you with a week's notice for almost any reason. But it's the right thing to do for an employer to make sure they're clear with you about why they're dismissing you. So the other marker at the moment in UK law is 2 years service. Now, under employment law, then over 2 years service, then you have an opportunity to claim unfair dismissal or constructive dismissal. We'll come on to those in a minute. But so going back to less than 2 years service, your employer can dismiss you, but they should have a good reason and follow a process. The process could be a redundancy process, it could be a performance process, or it may be a disciplinary process. You know, if somebody's who's late, you know, again and again and again, and then the employer would have a disciplinary, give them a warning, another disciplinary, give them a warning, and so on. So the employer is supposed to follow a fair process. And for more than 2 years service, then it's much more important that the employer follows a proper process. As I mentioned before, could be poor performance, could be redundancy or misconduct. Now, if they don't follow that proper process and give proper warning, then it could be that the employee can claim unfair dismissal, which we'll go on to in a bit, about how if you think that your employer is being unfair to you, how you can get some advice and see what you can do about it. But invariably, more than 2 years service, then they do have to follow like a proper process. So we'll come on to a little bit more about that in a minute. So this is talking about equal opportunities and discrimination. So there are laws in the UK that say that everybody should have the same opportunities for work, for promotion, irrespective of their gender, their nationality, their age, you know, any of those things. And the discrimination laws in the UK apply to from day one of employment. So as we'd mentioned before, about at the moment there's a marker of 2 years before you can go to an employment tribunal and claim unfair dismissal if they haven't treated you properly. If an employee believes that they've been discriminated against on what you can see on the slide, for any of those reasons, it could be age, disability, race, and race can include colour, ethnic origin and nationality, religion, belief are a reason, pregnancy and maternity, marriage and civil partnership, sex, sexual orientation and gender reassignment. So if for any of those reasons you think that at any time within your employment, but even from day one, if somebody is treating you differently than they would treat somebody else, that makes you feel very uncomfortable and causes you to resign, or they dismiss you and you think it's for one of these reasons, then it could be discrimination. And that discrimination in the UK, there's law against an employer behaving in that way, and there is certainly a certain possibility that you can go and get some advice and might be able to do something about that. So on here it just says having a problem at work. So I think, you know, a lot of people have problems at work, and it's good to know what your rights are. And it's good to know that there are places where you can go and get some help and some advice. Quite often, as we all know, in work situations, things can get sometimes difficult or confusing or complicated. So sometimes it's good just to talk to somebody about this and find out if you have been treated badly by your employer. And in which case, if you have been treated badly by your employer, then everybody has the same rights in the UK. Once you've got the right to work, all the employment law rights are supporting you just as much as they're supporting they support everybody in exactly the same way. So there's two numbers there that you can get some free advice from. I did notice actually when I was researching this that ACAST, you can call them and ask for an interpreter in your first language, which I thought was, was very good of them, which makes it much easier for somebody to explain a situation if they don't have to do it in English, if their English isn't that strong. So, any questions? That was me.